Hello there. On behalf of SysGrip and the Miami-based planning team, I have the pleasure of welcoming you to Aware for All. My name is Hope Venturcelli, and I am the Manager of Events and Community Engagement with SysGrip. SysGrip is a nonprofit organization that educates the public about clinical research. We do not conduct trials or recruit for trials, but we believe that everyone should have the information they need to be informed about clinical research. To make sure this program is a meaningful educational experience to you, we ask for your feedback. We will have 7 poll questions pop up on your screen throughout the program. These questions will also be your raffle tickets at the end of the program. So let's start with an easy one to test out the poll feature. I am participating in this webinar as someone interested in learning more about participating in clinical trials, or a professional involved or associated with clinical trials. You'll have 30 seconds to answer each poll question as it pops up throughout the program. If you have any questions throughout the event, please shoot us a message in the chat box. Our team will be monitoring the chat and will bring up any questions you may have during the question and answer portion. Now let's look at why we are here today. Our ability to live long, healthy lives is due in large part to the advances in medical treatments, advances that would not have been possible without the participation of volunteers in clinical trials. This past year, over 2 million people took part in about 80,000 clinical research studies of drugs and procedures that treat, detect, and prevent diseases and health problems. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge any of our audience members who have participated in clinical research. We thank you for your important contribution to advance medical science and the health for all of us. At the close of this program, we would like to recognize all of our study volunteers, or as we like to call them, medical heroes, with a special ceremony. SysGrip was honored to collaborate on this important program with over 350 community and research organizations. These groups helped to spread the word about the AWARE program, expanded our reach, and helped to contact thousands of people in the Miami area to raise awareness about clinical research. You may visit many of these groups in our interactive health fair. You can access the exhibit alley by clicking on the link in the resource tab at the bottom of your screen, or by clicking on the image directly below the media player. You can revisit the virtual exhibit alley whenever you'd like. This information will also be in the follow-up email you'll receive after the program. I would also like to take a moment to recognize our planning team. For the past few months, these dedicated individuals have helped to organize today's event. Without their help and support, this program would not have been possible. I also wanted to take a minute to recognize the SysGrip team, who has worked tirelessly to ensure that today's program is meaningful and educational. I am so proud to be a part of this team. We would now like to thank our generous Aware for All sponsors, all of whom contributed funds and support to make this program free and accessible to all. A very special thank you to the Aware Industry Consortium, Biogen, Boston Scientific, CSL Behring, EMD Serono, IQVIA, Janssen, Merck, Otsuka, Pfizer, and WCG for providing support to bring this educational program to 5 cities this year, to our national sponsor, the Allergy and Asthma Network, and to our in-kind outreach supporters and exhibitors, the American Kidney Foundation, Ariana Center, Clinical Pharmacology of Miami, Clinical Site Partners LLC, Debbie's Dream Foundation, Florida Breast Cancer Foundation, JDRF, the Lupus Research Alliance, Myovant, NAMI, National Kidney Foundation, the National MS Society, Pals for Health, People Science, Siegel Trials, and Susan G. Komen. Thank you all for your continued support. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rishi Kakar, who will provide an overview of clinical research. Then Aaron Tyerman from Siegel Trials will share some tips for mental health. After that, we'll host a panel discussion with study volunteers and research professionals, sharing information about their roles in the clinical research process. We encourage you to send in questions through the chat box or by emailing awareforall@sysgrip.org. We'll open for a Q&A directly following this panel's discussion. Finally, Tracy Jason from the Florida Breast Cancer Foundation will share helpful tips about breast health before we conclude with our Medical Hero ceremony and raffle. Let's get started. A copy of your overview presentation called What Clinical Research Means to You is included in our digital handbook. There's a link in our Resource Center at the bottom of the left-hand corner of your screen to download a copy and follow along. We'll also send a link to view right after the event. This is a wonderful educational tool, and I encourage you to read it after the program and share it with your friends and family. Poll question number 1 should have just popped up on your screens. It reads, how would you rate your knowledge of clinical research? You'll have 30 seconds to answer. And again, the question is, how will you rate your knowledge of clinical research? And don't forget that by answering these questions, your name will be entered into a raffle at the end of the program. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome Dr. Rishi Kakar, Chief Scientific Officer and Associate Medical Director with Siegel Trials.
Hi, welcome everyone. Now, welcome to the Aware for All Clinical Research Education Day. Now, we're very thrilled that so many of you are joining us today to learn more about the clinical research. Now, this program is brought to you by CISCRIP, which is the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, with support from your local organizations, including my team, for example, at Siegel Trials. Now, our goal is to help you understand the clinical research process, including the risk and the benefit of participating in clinical research. Let me ask you guys a question. Have you ever taken an allergy medication? Maybe you've given your child a pain reliever, or perhaps you have a friend or a family member who is a cancer survivor. If so, you can thank the clinical research volunteers. Around the world, people are living longer, they're living healthier lives because people that they never met volunteer to take part in these clinical research studies. And those studies help find ways to prevent, treat, and even cure certain medical conditions. Now, we like to call these volunteers medical heroes. Now, most people don't understand what clinical research is all about. Now, some people are afraid and they may think that clinical research volunteers are being treated like guinea pigs. Or maybe they've heard stories about clinical trials that have gone wrong. Or they can still remember the past abuses when there were no protections in place for clinical research volunteers. That's why at CISCRIP, we believe in education before participation. And we think more people understand the clinical research process, more they'll appreciate those who volunteer to participate in the clinical research. Now, let's begin from the beginning about what is a clinical trial. Now, what we learn from clinical research study is meant to improve public health. And often it starts with some following questions that I will go through. Number one, how does a disease progress and how can it be prevented? How well does a new drug work or not work? Is there a better way to treat a disease? How do genes affect illness? Does where people live change their health? Now, researchers can only answer these questions with the help of participants or clinical research volunteers. So, what is a clinical trial? Now, a clinical trial is a carefully designed study where researchers will ask the volunteers to do something, for example, to take a new drug or new treatment, so they can answer a specific medical question. And these questions may be, is the treatment safe? Does it improve a certain medical condition? Does it have side effects? How much should people take? Is it any better than the medicine that are already available on the market? Because researchers are trying and studying new investigational treatments, there are some risks to participating in clinical trial. But in all cases, something is learned from clinical research studies that can help inform the medical knowledge and improve public health. So it is really important to understand that being in clinical trial is not same as going to your doctor for care. Now, when you go to your doctor, for example, she may give you a treatment that has already been tested and approved by the government. We call these routine treatments or standard of care. This is the care that we know works for most people. This is the care you would get if you go to your doctor for regular appointment, or maybe if you have a health problem. The very important thing to understand is the importance of diversity and studying a diverse group of people when it comes to clinical research. The people are different. For many years, most clinical trials were done on white men only. Now, this meant that groups such as African American, women, minorities, they were not included. But today, the clinical trials welcome the participation of all people. And those clinical trials are closely monitored for their safe and ethical treatment of volunteers. Now, we know that being male, female, young, old, race, ethnicity, all of this can affect the way people respond to diseases and treatments. Well, let me give you some examples. For example, Alzheimer's disease happens twice as often in women than in men. Type 2 diabetes, for example, and asthma are more common in African American population. Hispanics and Asians and white women are more likely to develop osteoporosis. When you think of children, for example, children respond to drugs differently than adults. That's why it's really important that scientists need to study all different types of people to volunteer for research. Think about it. The more diverse the participant in clinical trial, the more researchers can learn about the different ways that people will respond to those medical treatments. Now, it's essential that diverse communities are adequately represented in clinical trials in order to understand the disease and then how to treat it among each unique population. I talked a little bit about diversity. Well, let me give you a little bit more insight into that diversity. Now, some people may remember some of the past abuses, like the US public health study, for example, of syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama. In that particular study, the treatment was withheld from the African-American men for many years. Or maybe the story of Henrietta Lacks, what we now know as HeLa cells. That was the most commonly used cell line in scientific research. These studies actually gathered information about those patients without their consent or even remuneration for their participation. Now, people wonder, can something like that happen today? Well, the answer is, it is not likely. Federal government and ethical practice are in place today to monitor the safety and to protect the rights of study volunteers. Today, the public and professionals are more aware than ever of the need to have diverse population in clinical research. And we're actually taking steps to break down the participation barriers, improve diversity, and pave the way for a healthier future for everyone. I do want to bring your attention to the fact that several studies have shown that underrepresented minority population consistently demonstrate an equal or even higher willingness to participate in clinical research, even more than their white counterparts. Individuals within these communities have said that lack of access to clinical trial is the primary reason why they don't participate. Now, this includes outreach, communication that failed to reach them. Health and researcher professions are not asking them to participate, for example, clinical trials that are maybe too far away for them, or participation requirements that are too difficult to follow. But if we work together, we can solve these problems and make clinical trials far more accessible. So let's talk a little bit about the different phases of the clinical trials. Now, we talked about broadly what a clinical trial is, but let's talk about the stages and break it down to help you better understand the process involved in it. So how long, for example, does it typically take to advance a new therapy? So the stages are broken down from stage 1 to stage 4. A clinical research, for example, during a phase 1 study is done where a drug is tested for the first time with a very small number of volunteers. And often these are healthy volunteers. So the goal of these clinical trials in phase 1 is to learn what is the safe dose of a particular drug. How does it work in the body? Is it harmful? Once the phase 1 is concluded, the next stage is called the phase 2 study. This is when the researcher begins to understand how well a drug performs or works, and if it is safe for patients who have a specific disease or condition. Like phase 1, now safety is still the main goal in phase 2 studies, but phase 2 studies look to answer some basic questions. For example, how much should a patient take? What are the usual side effects of that particular medication? Only about 1/3 of the drug that enter clinical testing ever successfully complete phase 2 and progress to a large group of patients that we call phase 3 studies. Now, at this stage, researchers may check the drug safety, how well it works in different group of patients, for example. The trial may also compare the new drug with already approved drug. And then there is a phase 4 study that I mentioned at the beginning. Now, phase 4 studies usually happen when a treatment has already been approved by the FDA or Food and Drug Administration. These usually involve, for example, a large number of patients, and they look at the real-world experience to check to see if the drug works well over a long time. This clinical research process from phase 1 to phase 3 can take 7 or more years. Now, one other thing that I'm sure all of you have heard a lot of the news lately is about the COVID-19 and the development of vaccines and treatment as it relates to coronavirus or COVID-19. The vaccines and treatments for infectious disease usually take about 9 to 10 years to develop. Again, going through all those phases that we talked about, phase 1 to phase 3 and possibly phase 4. Now, this seems like a long time, but it is a necessary time to really understand the real effect of a new therapy and to determine whether it is safe and effective at a specific dose level. The clinical trial process for COVID-19 treatments and vaccines is moving at a much faster pace. It may actually produce the promised result within a few years. Now, some treatments and vaccines have a head start. Why? Because they are based on research that was already conducted on the viruses that are similar to COVID-19. Also, pandemic has really mobilized a higher level of coordination and cooperation between companies and government agencies, which has also helped speed up the process. In the educational handbook that you will be receiving today, you'll find a number of resources about COVID-19 studies and the new therapies that are in development. So I hope you take a look at that. Now, who sponsors these clinical trials? Where does the funding come from? The clinical trials can be sponsored by many different entities, including government, academic medical centers, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, or even medical device companies. So what does the research involve and what does a team look like? We have talked a lot about that it takes many years for research drug to get approved, but what does that team comprise of? So research really involves a lot of people who do a lot of different things. Let's take an example, a sports team, right? So if you watch sports, and you will probably appreciate this analogy. So like members of the sports team, clinical trials have coaches, players, officials, where each person have an important role to play. So let's start from the beginning with the principal investigator. Now think of a principal investigator or the physician who is running the study like a head coach of that sports team. He or she is responsible, for example, of organizing the study, leading the study, as well as really recording and studying the data. Now the PI or the principal investigator or the coach in this case also directs the whole team. Like a head coach, the principal investigator will follow the playbook, and this playbook in our language is called the study protocol. Now this playbook or protocol is a set of instructions that everyone in that game or in that team must follow. It's a plan that's clearly laid out on how the study is going to be carried out. Who else is on the team? Well, there's also clinical research coordinators. Think of them like an assistant coach on a sports team. They help the principal investigator or the head coach. The clinical research coordinator will handle the day-to-day duties or activity at the research site. He or she has an easy access to the principal investigator, and they will be the main contact for any volunteer participating in the study. So for example, if you have a question about a trial or your health in the trial, the coordinator would be the best person to reach out to. The other really key component of this particular study team is the referees. Every sports team has a referees that will basically really make sure the rules are followed. The referees will help protect the safety of the volunteers and clinical research team to make sure the team is following the rules. The referees will review the study, for example, before it starts. These referees will keep you safe and give you all the information. The number and the type of the referees involved in the trial can depend on the research that is being conducted. But every clinical trial is actually reviewed, approved, and watched over by a committee that we call an independent local committee, and the other name is called Institutional Review Board, or for short term, IRB. Now, it is the law. The IRB makes sure the trial is run ethically and fair, and that there is not too much risk to the study volunteers or participants. Now, during the trial, the research must let the IRB know if there are any changes in the study plan. Or if the volunteer, for example, experiences an injury, a serious injury, a side effect, IRB can choose to end the trial if it feels the volunteers are not safe. Now, there are some other referees as well. The referees from federal government are also involved in the process. The Food and Drug Administration is a federal entity that will review the study. They will inspect the research center and monitor the research group to make sure they are following the federal guidelines. The FDA have the final say in whether or not the treatment is approved. Now let's talk a little bit about what I think are the most important part in the members of the team, and that's the study volunteers. Think of volunteers like players on the field. You can have the coach, you can have the assistant coach, but sports cannot go on, a game cannot go on without the players. So without the volunteers, the clinical research cannot happen. We need all different types of people to participate in clinical research. Now, you don't even have to be sick to participate in a clinical research. A lot of research simply involves healthy volunteers. Now, your friends and family may also provide you a very important support system while you're taking part in the study. It is really important and often good to talk to your friends and family about the clinical trial. Sometimes they can help you come up with questions to ask your doctor. They can also support you while you participate. In the end, it is your job to make sure that the final decision is yours if you will participate in the study. So we've talked a lot about the study process. But the very important, crucial part of the study is to make sure that everyone has a chance to participate in research. You just have to find the clinical trial that is right for you. Now, just like the football game that we talked about, there are rules and not everyone can be on the field at the same time. So research team also has a list of requirements for the participants, just like the coaching staff would. Now, both the coaches and the players have to know the game and have to agree to work together. So let's talk about eligibility. So what is an eligibility for a particular study? Let's talk about sports as in comparison. Would a 10-year-old be allowed to play on a pro football sports team? They won't be, right? Why? Because it would be too dangerous for them. Well, just like in sports, the clinical trials have an eligibility criteria. These are guidelines that indicate who can be or cannot be in the study. So eligibility criteria ensures that the clinical trial is studying the right people under the right conditions. So if you are considering a trial, you must be honest with the research you're about to help. Lying or hiding information to get into a trial could really endanger your safety and potentially ruin the study. So let's assume your coaches say that you're eligible to play. So the next question would be, and what you have to ask yourself is, do I want to and do I choose to play? You cannot say whether you would want to play, you would not want to participate, if you don't really understand the rules of the game, right? So what are your responsibilities as a player? How long will the game be played? How long will it last? What are the risks and the benefit of playing? So similarly in research, there is an informed consent process that is developed and designed to answer all these questions. And this process is actually required by the FDA and IRB. This is one of the most important parts of research, and it's a term that you really are going to hear quite a bit, also called as informed consent or ICF. Now, before any volunteer can participate in a trial, he or she must read, understand, and sign the informed consent form. This is a long form that lists your rights as a volunteer. It includes details about the clinical trial. It describes your role as a volunteer. It describes any procedures or tests that you will have. And it also warns you about any known or unknown side effects of the study drug. It describes the benefits of participating in the trial. So by signing the form, you're saying that you understand the clinical trial and you're agreeing to it and you're agreeing to follow that study protocol or the playbook. So the informed consent form is a pretty complex document, and the study staff will go through it carefully with you and answer all your questions. Now, you as a volunteer or participant should never feel rushed or pressured to sign this form. It's really important to note that the IRB can ask the researcher to translate this form in multiple languages to the language, for example, that a study participant prefers to speak. Now, as a research volunteer, you have rights and responsibilities. So let's talk about that a little bit as well. Now, you have the right to understand the purpose of the trial, the benefits, the risk, and the side effects of the clinical trial. Now, you have the right to ask any questions. You have a right to discuss any concerns with the research staff at any time during the trial. And you have the right to full, complete, and clear answers. Most importantly, you have the right to quit the trial at any time for any reason. Remember, you're a volunteer. You're free to leave the trial if you choose to do so. The research staff job is to help you do it safely. Now, you've heard a lot about clinical trial and your rights and responsibility as a volunteer. Remember, deciding to take part in a clinical trial is a personal decision. What's right for the person sitting next to you may not be right for you. In this section for our presentation, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the risk and benefit that I think you should consider. Remember, scientists Usually when they set up their studies, they do it in a way to ensure that the research will be fair. Now, they also want their research to be accurate and unbiased. In other words, they don't want their own ideas about what they think should happen in the trial to influence the results of the trial. To set up the fair study, volunteers at times may be split into different groups. We call them different study groups. Now, that's usually done randomly by a computer program. It's very similar to, if you may, flipping a coin at a coin toss. The researcher and the volunteer do not get to decide which group of volunteer will be in which group. This is called, we call it randomized study or randomization, because it is done at a random level. Sometimes researcher will go a step further and they will do something that we call blind the study. Now, blind, just like the name suggests, means the volunteer and the researchers both will not know which treatment the volunteer is receiving. Now, in some trial, researchers will use something called a placebo. A placebo is a medicine that looks just like the medicine but doesn't have any medicine inside it. Sometimes, some of you may know, this is a term called sugar pill. What's interesting is that even though the placebo has no medicine inside it, there are times when people who are taking placebo improve or actually feel better during a trial. We call this the placebo effect. As a clinical research volunteer, even if you're in placebo, you will be closely monitored. So deciding whether to participate or not participate in the clinical trial is a really important personal decision. Now, here are some of the reasons why some of the patients and some of the volunteers say that they did to get involved in clinical trial. Some of them do it because they feel it gives them an access to brand new therapy that are not yet available on the market. Others do it for a more philanthropic purpose. This is to advance science. It will help others in their condition. And others will also do it because the research staff will be able to observe your health very closely while you're a part of a clinical study. I do want to talk a little bit briefly about compensation. Some, but not all clinical trials will pay for the volunteer's travel costs, pay for your time and commitment. Now, these amounts can vary widely, but getting paid should never be your only reason for volunteering in the clinical study. All research involves risk, but these can be different types of risk. Some can be physical risk. For example, you may not get better. You may get worse or may be uncomfortable during the study. Some risks are emotional risk. The protocol or the study playbook, it can be demanding. For some, it may be stressful. There may also be financial risk. There may be out-of-pocket expenses, such as your child care expenses while you are conducting research or missing work. And then there's also a question of privacy and confidentiality. When you agree to participate in research, you are giving permission for researchers to collect information about you. Now, researchers must follow rules that protect your privacy and your information. So be sure to let all your doctors know that you are in a clinical trial and have a contact number to reach the research staff in case of an emergency. Remember, the volunteering does take time and effort. Now, you can work with the study staff to try to accommodate your schedule. Even if you want to continue to participate, your doctor, the referees, or the company making the new drug could stop the study. The one other thing I do want to talk a little bit about is what happens during the study also. Now, many volunteers drop out of the study because they don't fully understand what they're signing up for. So it's really important to do your homework before getting involved in the study. Learn about the clinical trial, ask questions, read all the information provided by the study staff. You may even go online to learn about the potential treatment being studied. Take your time with the process. There is nothing wrong in asking the researcher to slow down or maybe explain again in simpler words. Ask questions. Talk about your concern with the study staff, your doctor, your friends, your family. Bring a friend or the family member to the study visit so maybe they can ask some questions. Try tape recording your visit. Take notes so you can refer to the information later, and maybe you'll have some follow-up questions at a later time. But if you do decide to join a study, you should feel confident that you have made an informed choice. You should feel comfortable that the clinical trial staff will support you and they will answer all your questions. So There is a handy way to think about it at every step, right? So you can start by becoming, number one, aware of the clinical trial. You think you're interested, so you now discuss it with the doctor. If you're still interested, now you're going to want to know more about the details of it. Now you talk to the research staff and find out whether you're eligible. And after you've talked to the research staff, you find out whether you're eligible. If it sounds like something that's right for you, then you can make a choice to sign the informed consent form. But remember, one thing I do want to point out is that even while you're taking part in the study, it's really important that you continue to ask questions and decide whether you want to choose to complete the clinical trial or not. Informed consent is not a process that happens only in the beginning. It is an ongoing process and not a single event. Remember, today's presentation is an important first step. Now it's up to you to learn more about the clinical trials. The best place to start would be with your doctor. Now you can get information also from the local research centers. For example, you can get it from your local disease advocacy groups, medical journals, conferences. There are also a number of websites that are specifically devoted to clinical studies and clinical trials. Clinicaltrials.gov is the site that's maintained by the government agency called National Institutes of Health. That includes all of the trial enrollment information. Centerwatch.com lists trials that are enrolling volunteers. There are some other ones. For example, you may check searchclinicaltrials.org or researchmatch.org. This will help you learn more about the clinical trial and connect with the study team. In addition, many pharmaceutical companies, the biotech companies, they also list trials that are currently active on their website. Now, you can also call a number, 617-725-2750. SysScript provides a free search engine, search service that's designed to help the patients find the trial that may be right for them. Or you may just talk to your doctor, research site, friends, and family to help find the resources for you. Now, research volunteers truly are medical heroes, without whom the medical science cannot move forward. I would like to really and sincerely thank you for taking time today to learn about the clinical research process. And I strongly encourage you to share what you've learned today with your friends, your family, and people throughout your community. On behalf of all of us, I would like to say thank you to millions of people who give the gift of participation in clinical trial each year, and to the rest of us who admire them for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kakar. I thought that we could just run through a couple of questions that we've been getting from our audience. And one of the questions sent in is, how do you determine if a clinical trial is right for you? So do you have any advice that you would like to share to somebody who's considering getting involved with the trial?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because one clinical trial that is right for one particular volunteer individual may not be right for the other. I think the most important thing to really understand is that what is the clinical trial process? Is there something that you would want to be involved in? And if it is, then what is the reason for you being involved in it? It is going to be important for you to just have discussion with your physician and your doctors to understand whether getting involved in a process that involves research is something that will be a good fit for you. So I think really taking into account what are the factors involved in you wanting to be a part of the clinical trial. Is it because you really want to advance the science? Is it because you want to be a part of a research process to potentially try a new type of a medication that has not been approved yet? Or it is because you really want to understand your own disease process much better, to have a better insight into your disease process. All of those questions, either one or all together, may be the reason for you to particularly want to be a part of clinical research process.
Fantastic, yeah. And I know we have alluded into the slides, and something that's also really important to us at SysScript, as well as many of our audience members, it's the importance of diversity in trials, because we often say that health is not one size fits all. So what are some things that are really important, especially over at Siegel Trials, in order to really reach those diverse populations to get them involved with clinical research?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think that question is a really important one. And here at Siegel Trials, where I am the physician and the medical director, it is really important for us to really have a community-based approach to clinical studies. You mentioned about diversity, and I think we mentioned that, alluded that during our slide deck, which is that the clinical trials are not a one glove fit all. When we prescribe medication as physicians, that medication is being given to people from all diverse backgrounds. African American, Hispanic, Asian, white, male, female. So it becomes really important to, when we do a clinical study, to involve as wide range of group of people as possible to really provide a good information about that medication. Now, one drug may work better for one particular socioeconomic or racial group and not the other. So it really becomes important for us to understand how is it that all of the diverse backgrounds can come together and provide information about the medication that we can take back to the companies and grant them that information, which, so when the drug is approved, and if approved, has really carried the information in its totality. Especially when it comes to the underserved population, it is really important for them to be involved, because as a part of a clinical research, we are collecting tremendous amount of information about how a drug affects their body, how their body responds to the drug. So it becomes important to really understand that we have that as broad role in that as possible. So that's why I think really having the diverse population from all backgrounds becomes really crucial to be a part of clinical study.
Thank you again, Dr. Kakar. We really appreciate your providing a foundation of information about clinical research. We will open for more questions right after our panel discussion. So I just wanted to encourage you to share any questions with us through the chat box or by emailing awareforall@sysgrip.org. And we'll keep collecting those questions as they're coming through. Here we have poll question number 2. It reads, have you ever participated in a clinical trial? Thank you for answering. Now I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Erin Tyerman, Director of Business and Clinical Development with Siegel Trials, and she's going to share some tips, tricks, and helpful information for our mental health.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Erin Tyerman, and I work at Siegel Trials. We are a network of clinical research sites in the South Florida area, focusing primarily on psychiatry, addiction, neurology, women's health, and now kind of in the realm of infectious diseases with COVID-19. I'm going to go over some topics today related to mental health exercises that you can do to kind of help reduce anxiety and depression. Mental illness itself can happen to anybody. Mood disorders such as anxiety and depression really can be incredibly crippling feelings and challenging to overcome at times. The current state of the world right now kind of lends itself to an increase in anxiety and depression, even without really maybe having even a full diagnosis of major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. So what I thought I'd do today is go over, like I said, different mental health exercises that can help ease those feelings of anxiety and depression and help establish routines. So some of these activities that we think can help, number one is just kind of identifying triggers. So these can be words, emotions, situations, things that you notice that increase your levels of depression or anxiety. And so if you're able to go ahead and identify these ahead of time, you can either prepare for the feelings that may come or even avoid situations, avoid emotions that might increase those levels of depression and anxiety. Another big topic for kind of helping reduce anxiety and depression is meditation. So what this does is you kind of take time and pull yourself out of this physical world that we're in and work on relaxation. A good practice for meditation is to go ahead and do that right before you go to sleep. Good sleep habits also in general help decrease anxiety and depression. So if you go ahead and meditate right before bed, it kind of prepares you for sleep. It relaxes your body, it relaxes your mind, it kind of allows you to have a better sleep. And that can in turn reduce those feelings related to anxiety and or depression. Another good practice is to kind of set goals for yourself, set long-term goals. Pursue something that you're passionate about. Pursuing your goals or focusing on something for long-term will then allow you to kind of focus on those things instead of focusing on those feelings of anxiety and depression. And then it keeps you motivated, it keeps you on track, and it gives you something to work towards. Physical exercise. I know everybody hears about physical exercise for mental health, but it really does help. There's so many different benefits you get from exercise. It can calm anxiety, it can regulate mood swings, it improves self-esteem, increases your motivation. Exercising for 20 to 30 minutes a day, even just brisk walking, can really help kind of ease your mind, decrease those anxious feelings, and make yourself feel good, both physically and mentally. Another nice kind of exercise to do is focus on positivity, which I know is much easier said than done a lot of times. But a suggestion would be making positive lists. So keeping lists of things that you're proud of, something nice that someone said about you, something good that happened, or something that you like to focus on that makes you feel good. And then you can take those lists and keep them where you can see them on a regular basis. So either put them on your refrigerator, put them on the notes section of your cell phone. Everybody's so digital and in tune to their phones. Put them in your phone. When you're feeling down, when you're feeling anxious, you can pull those up and focus on all the positive things that you've done or someone has said about you to kind of make you feel better. Change that focus. Don't focus so much on the negative and kind of focus and more on the positive. Another good habit to have is to reward yourself. Again, another one that's probably easier said than done, but when you complete a goal, treat yourself to something. It could be small, it could be your favorite meal, it could be big, it could be a vacation. But when you complete a goal, reward yourself for doing so. And goals don't have to be big major things either. If you needed to get the bed made 4 times this week and you did it, treat yourself to ice cream. If that's anything that you can work towards that can increase your motivation, that can give you some sense of structure, those all kind of help in reducing those feelings of anxiety and depression. Focusing on your self-esteem. Say no to self-hate. A lot of times with anxiety and depression, individuals tend to focus on the negative. So whether it's you're being negative about your body, you're negative about your personality, about your strengths, about your self-worth, say no to the self-hate. Focus on loving yourself. Focus on the positive things about yourself. Don't think negatively about yourself. And again, another one that's easier said than done, but that really helps kind of change your entire way of thinking and helps you alleviate some of those symptoms that are related to anxiety and depression. And finally, something fun, focus on creative activities. A lot of times in individuals who have anxiety and depression, many people tend to be highly creative. And even if you're not, you can still find a creative activity. You could write a poem, you could paint a picture, you could draw, you could color. During this pandemic, I actually started doing diamond paintings, which are, you take little itty bitty dots and you put them all on a paper. They're all color coded and it makes a little painting. It's incredibly relaxing. It quiets your mind. It eases your mind. It's been incredibly fun. Reduces stress. And creative activities also help to increase mood. So those are just some tips and tricks to kind of help get us through what we're going through right now. The world could use some positivity. It helps kind of release some of that anxiety and depression. And I hope you guys can use them. Again, I am Erin Tyerman. I'm from Siegel Trials. We have clinical trials running all the time for mental illness, women's health, infectious diseases. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to our website, www.siegeltrials.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Those were some really helpful tips, and I love your ideas. You can visit Siegel Trials booth in the Maurice A. Fair Park room in the virtual exhibit alley. Poll question number 3 is now on your screens, and we're testing our knowledge after Dr. Kakara's presentation. So, true or false? Responses to medicines can vary depending on a number of factors, including someone's genetic background, ethnicity, sex, and lifestyle. This is why scientists need to have a diverse representation in clinical trials. And we're going to follow that up with question number 4, true or false? An institutional review board's role is to make sure that the study is ethical and the rights and welfare of participants are protected. We hope everyone was able to answer those with ease. And as we move on to our panel portion of the program, I want to remind everyone of our chat box feature once again. It's a great way to interact with our speakers and ask them any questions you may have about clinical research. Next, I would like to welcome SysGroup's founder and board chair, Ken Getz, who will be moderating our panel discussion, and our speakers, study participant Matthew Racher, study participant Kenneth Smittle, Dr. Dara Richardson-Heron with Pfizer, and Dr. Eric Lau with the Moffitt Cancer Center.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us on our panel discussion today, and I want to thank our panelists for joining us as well. Each of our panel members brings a unique perspective. Each of them has been involved in clinical research in different ways, some as a volunteer, some as a member of an investigative site that has conducted research, and some that have been involved in planning and managing the execution of clinical trials. So I'd like to begin by introducing our panel members, and then we'll open it up for a formal discussion. And then we'll follow that with some questions from our audience as well. So we have with us Matt Racher, who is a study volunteer, Kenneth Smittle, who's also a study volunteer, or Ken Smittle. We have Dr. Eric Lau, who is a research professional at a research center, and Dr. Dara Richardson-Heron, who is a research professional at a pharmaceutical company. And what I'd like to do is really kick things off by asking if each of you could tell us briefly about yourself and how you've been involved in clinical research. And Matt, maybe I can ask you to get our panel discussion started.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Matthew. I currently work as a volunteer in with a mental health organization, and I'm a certified peer specialist. So I've been I help people in mental health recovery, and I have been in several research clinical trials since my own experience going through mental health challenges, yeah, I'm excited to be here today and share any experience and insights I have. So thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Matthew. Eric, maybe I can ask you to share a little bit about your background.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Lau. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Tumor Biology at Moffitt Cancer Center. So I have a lab at Moffitt, and I belong to the basic research division. And so what that means is that our lab focuses on dissecting and understanding molecular mechanisms of how cancer works. So my lab specifically focuses on melanoma and breast cancer as models. And we basically have spent the last couple of years trying to understand our discovery from a couple of years ago that a seaweed-derived sugar can be administered orally, at least to our animal models, to suppress melanoma and breast cancer. And so over the past few years, we've dissected how this is actually working at the molecular and cellular level, and we're trying to figure out how we can translate that into eventually a clinical trial.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Ken, can I ask you to tell us a bit about your background and your involvement in clinical research?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenneth. I'm an assistant golf professional out of the David Golf Club, and this is my first clinical research. I volunteered to do this so that in hopes that I may be able to help others with medications towards their mental incapacities.
Thank you, Ken, or Kenneth. And Dara, if I can invite you now to describe your background and involvement in clinical research.
Thank you so much, Ken, and thanks also to the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research participation for having me. It's really great to be here. If only we were together in person in Miami. So yes, I'm Dara Richardson Heron. I often describe myself as a physician by trade and an advocate by choice. I've been focused on becoming a doctor from as early as I can remember. Looking back, during my residency at Bellevue Hospital, which many of you may know as the oldest public hospital in the United States, was in many ways an inflection point because that's where I saw patients, many who through no fault of their own presented with late stage diseases. And so, you know, it's interesting, for years I'd learned about health disparities in academic settings, but I was now on the front lines seeing health disparities play out in a real way, often because people had little or no access to health care. And so I think it was that devastating time and what I saw there. And also I was training during the height of the AIDS epidemic, where there were extremely limited options and countless people were suffering every day, much like what we're seeing now with COVID-19. So I think as I look back, that was an aha moment for me personally. And I think it was there where I knew that the impact that I was determined to create in the world would require me to think big, far beyond traditional clinical settings, which were the norm at the time. And that set me on a 25+ career that has spanned academic, government, for-profit, nonprofit, and it brings me to my current role as the Chief Patient Officer at Pfizer, where I lead the company's work to advance patient-focused programs and platforms with the goal of better responding to patients and communities' needs and also reducing health care disparities.
Great. Well, thank you all again for joining us today. And I'd like to begin by asking each of you to think about, given your perspective, what are some of the biggest knowledge gaps or misconceptions that people generally have about clinical research? And maybe, Kenneth, if I could ask you, since it's so fresh in your mind, if you could just talk about what were some of the things that you didn't know about or that you think a lot of patients may not know about clinical research.
As far as myself, I kind of thought, you know, everything would be like the guinea pig lab rat kind of old school, like you see on Frankenstein movies on TV. But that is all just like a facade. It's not like that at all. You know, it's just testing new medications to see if that it can help, like myself and others, to become better and get the drug approved if it's workable.
You know, I just like to add, you know, there's so many misconceptions about the clinical research process in general, including what Ken mentioned, you know, but, you know, I think some of them are as a result of deep concerns that have resulted in, you know, people being concerned about what happened in the past with research, as you described, people being treated as guinea pigs. But the good news is, you know, there have been so many changes, you know, in making sure that people are really treated fairly in clinical trials, and that, you know, it's also important for people to understand that, before any investigational drug can be given to a human subject who volunteers, scientists have to complete a rigorous screening and preclinical testing process. Sometimes people think that they don't have a say about what happens, and worse, they think that they, as you mentioned, won't be treated with respect or dignity. And so I think as healthcare professionals, we have to really acknowledge and address these misconceptions head on, and also share the good news that because of, unfortunately, unethical behavior in the past, we're really fortunate now that there are very strict guidelines and review boards that have been put in place to make sure that all clinical trial participants are treated fairly and ethically. So there's some really good news here.
if
Matt, can I bring you in and ask your thoughts, perhaps even reflecting on your own experience and what you tell others who might be considering a clinical trial?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going into my first clinical trial, it was looking back on it, it was post, mental health hospitalization. So I had, I was going through certain symptoms at the time. I had this kind of sense of mistrust with the system, and, but going into my initial clinical trial, I had these misconceptions, like I was going to be like this guinea pig. I was going to be this, are they really telling me what exactly they're looking for in this study, or is there a secret nature behind it? But going into it, I found that there was, it felt like more of a partnership. I was working with a team of people at a university who had an interest in really diving into understanding serious mental illness, and I felt connected as a human being, as a person. So having these misconceptions, but then being educated on all the details of the study, and having some great clinical staff to work with and be a part of this study helped with those misconceptions, helped kind of reframe them. So
great, thank you, Matt. And Eric, I imagine, given your perspective and where you sit, people need to think a little bit differently about clinical trials that might involve tissue samples. And so what are some of the issues or misconceptions that people may have about the kind of trials that you're involved with, the research that you're involved with?
So I'll start by saying there are many.
Right.
I think in large part, this all stems from lack of public knowledge about the actual research process, and going even earlier than the clinical trial process, going to basic research. The general lay public does not, most of the time, does not have any sort of insight or access at all to even learn about these things. I mean, I think most people, they have their insights into lab research back in high school or college where they took a class, but they really don't understand what that process looks like in the real world when we're working on the next diagnostic or the next therapeutic agent or what have you. So for example, when I used to travel for conferences, some of the, if I sit and talk to my seat neighbor, the biggest or the most common questions that I would get is, oh, well, we're spending so much money on cancer research, why don't we have a cure yet? It's so much money, and what people don't understand is it's very expensive research. But I think a large misconception is that that a lot of money is being dumped into research, and that people are in research to sort of make it rich quick, and it couldn't be further from the truth. If people would only know, the sort of almost poverty level salaries that our graduate students and postdocs earn while working 6 to 7 day weeks, and we're talking about growing human cells in tissue culture incubators around the clock, 7 days a week. I mean, it's like the baby daycare that never ends. And we always have to have staff and overhead and all of these costs that people just don't know about. So I think what I'm trying to get at is we really need to improve communications between the basic research and patients and their caregivers, so that we can bring both parties together and really have open communication where one party can inform the other. I don't think that really exists at a lot of cancer centers or universities or medical centers. At Moffitt, we've actually recently tried to implement a forum type system where we actually bring patients in pre-COVID once a month, and we showcase basic research labs that research their specific types of cancer, and then they actually get to meet in a sort of roundtable discussion forum with actual researchers who are studying what they're afflicted with. And in turn, the patients can inform the researchers on what are their issues and what are their biggest concerns that they'd like to see addressed by research that aren't being addressed. And I think more of this type of communication really needs to happen. So
I think that's a great point. And maybe if I can just go back to you, Matthew, you mentioned that feeling of a partnership where some of that two-directional communication and really speaking the same language, a plain language, were those important parts of your feeling like you were part of a team and in a partnership as well in your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I felt like from the very first study I went into, there was a study done where the research, the person conducting the research was asking questions, and they were very detailed questions, and I felt like I was being valued as a human being, so it kind of formed this trust, it formed this sense of a partnership, and it was empowering too, to feel the sense of, okay, maybe what I'm contributing is something that can help others, that can further help the goals of this research project. So there's definitely that partnership that's important, and I feel like that level of understanding within the community, to know that the people involved in studies are helping others, their insights are valued. I think that's a very important a part of engaging the community as well.
Matt, what you said, and wherever you did the research, kudos to them, because the words that you are sharing are exactly the words that we all want to hear. Partnership, relationships. Because we know that it takes a lot to really build authentic and trusting bi-directional relationships, and transparency is really key to that. And so, it sounds like where you did your research, they really got it right. And it's my hope that many other centers across the nation will begin to do that same thing, because the reality is, if you're not part of the research, you may be left out of the cures. And there are large swaths of our population, particularly historically underserved communities, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ populations, rural, urban, that don't participate in research. But if they had an experience like you had, I think more people would participate. And I feel very strongly that, if more people participate in research, we'd learn much more about conditions, chronic conditions, and be better able to address and hopefully one day eliminate some of the major health disparities that we're seeing in our nation. So kudos to you for being a volunteer, but also kudos to the organization where you volunteered, because they got it right.
And I just wanted to add to that we've seen over the last 10 years growing interest in throughout the whole clinical research community to engage patients and their families in more meaningful ways, where that kind of trust and that partnership can exist. Eric, to your point, and Dara, to yours, obviously that includes a lot more open and transparent activity, really treating the other party as a partner in the process. And so I'll just echo, Dara, what you said. It's really nice to hear that more people are having that kind of experience today, and it's really part of that movement. Years ago, we never saw a chief patient officer, for example, in a pharmaceutical company, or we didn't see research centers that really went out of their way to accommodate conversations that would help patients feel more comfortable coming into the center to participate in a study. So it's really great to see. And CISCRP has been a part of that process as well. Now, I want all of you to think for a minute, and again, I think all in the spirit of partnership, imagine as many of our attendees will be really in that situation where they want to start evaluating and considering participation in a trial. And what are some of the things that you think they should know to consider when they look to a clinical trial and evaluate whether to participate? And maybe, Ken, can I invite you to kick us off there? What are things that you would recommend people think about when they're considering participating in a trial?
For myself, it would be the understanding of the clinical trial within itself, such as the side effects, the pros and cons of the medication. I agree with what was said earlier, participants is very vital, such as a cure for cancer and stuff like that. And it's very vital that people do volunteer so that we can come up with cures and, proper medication, such as for bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever the need may be. Without volunteers to test these things, we don't know. It's kind of like trial and error, but it's all teamwork. The study that I'm in, I felt very comfortable from the word go. Everyone's been very kind, asked my input, made sure my needs were met, and very comfortable. And it is teamwork, it's team effort.
Eric, can I bounce over to you? What are some things you would advise or recommend for someone considering a clinical trial?
From our basic research perspective, whenever we bring patients into the lab and give them a tour and we show them, okay, these are incubators that we have human patient-derived cell lines that we're growing and studying and whatnot. It stops there if we can't get our hands on more patient specimens. And I think as we explain that we are really trying to develop patient custom fit therapeutic approaches and diagnostics, we can't do that actually unless we get more patient samples to study. And I think as patients understand that, they realize that by enrolling in a trial and consenting to donate tissue or cellular specimens, that they're actively helping to push research ahead. So it's both for them and their benefit, but it's also to benefit everybody else who might eventually find themselves suffering from whatever it is they're suffering from. So it's a big benefit to them potentially, but it's a huge benefit to human knowledge and to our ability to help treat more people.
And I would just add that, as Eric said, I mean, all of us in one way or the other have been the beneficiaries of people who have participated in research. And certainly, I think the points that Ken made about, the things you consider are great. I would just add, if you're considering a potential study, you might want to think about how long will the study last and how it might affect your everyday life. You might want to realize that, there's a possibility that you'll get either the drug that is being treated, or you could get a placebo or, an inactive substance. You want to consider the risks and side effects, as Ken mentioned, and the benefits compared to the current treatment you're on. Also, you might want to, think about, can you do any part of the trial with your regular doctor, or if there's, a location that's preferable to you. You might want to think about things like, will you be able to continue to receive the study treatment after the study ends, and how you'll be, informed about the results of the study. You also want to consider your privacy. You want to ask questions about what steps will be taken to ensure that your privacy is protected. And one thing that I think most people don't understand when they're thinking about a clinical trial is they feel like, this is back to the misconception piece. Once they're in it, they have to stay in it forever. I mean, as a participant, you can leave a study at any time. Of course, that's not optimal for the researcher, but it's important for you to know if there's a point in time, if you don't feel comfortable, you can actually leave. So those are just a few questions you want to ask, and those should be covered in what's known as the informed consent when you come in and you're first considering. These are the types of questions you'll want to ask.
That's great. Matthew, anything else you'd add?
I would just have to echo what everyone stated. I think some really important points about informed consent, knowing the risks associated with the study, and just having open dialogue and open communication with the individuals conducting the research, so you can kind of demystify or dispel that any sense of mistrust or any preconceived misconceptions about the study.
And so I'll just add, these were great comments. I would add just a few of the messages that SysScript often communicates, one being, and Dara, it really piggybacks on the comprehensive considerations that you listed, that we encourage education before participation, right? Really ask questions until you're comfortable making a decision, and no question is off limits, right? You really need to feel comfortable. And I think the other point is that the questioning doesn't end after you sign the informed consent form, but while the study is underway, you can also ask questions as they arise, and that's just important for people to know. And as you mentioned, Dara, that the decision to participate is not a final one, but it evolves over time. And for a variety of reasons, people oftentimes have to discontinue their participation. It's not optimal, but it does happen. So one last formal question, and then I'd like to really open it up to our audience. But I wanted to get your thoughts, and Matthew, this one's going to come to you first, and then Ken, over to you, and then we'll open it up. But thinking about people who are now in a clinical trial, what are some of the challenges that you think study volunteers often encounter, and do you have any advice for them as they face some of those challenges? It could be anything from some of the challenges of balancing many of your responsibilities and your activities with your participation in a study. But are there any in particular that you want to touch on that we can talk about with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak from, I guess, my personal experience. You know, I went through a severe mental health challenge that required hospitalization. And I think from my experience, having the stigma of what I went through, you know, and then signing up for a study, there was this kind of maybe internal battle going on. Do I really want to share much about this? Am I ready to share much about this? And I don't know who I'm sharing it with. So it kind of created, you know, an interesting sense of risk associated with, you know, feeling like comfortable in sharing. And, you know, some other challenges could be, you know, not being involved in a study and maybe not seeing the immediate benefits of it, but, and then part of you says, okay, maybe it's time to, you know, cut ties or just back out of the study, or, transportation can sometimes be a challenge, but yeah, I'd say the stigma of what I felt and going into a study and not feeling comfortable sharing yet may have been kind of an initial big challenge.
Ken, I don't know how far along you are in your trial, but are there any sort of realities of being a volunteer that might present challenges for someone who's in a trial?
Basically, for myself, when I first got here, it was working through the misconceptions and some old myths that I had in my mind. You know, my mindset was like, you know, what is this going on here, you know? But then once I got here, it was mainly just my time management. And like we hit on here earlier before, it was educating myself. Education is the most powerful tool I think that I've been able to come up with. And that's, I do believe by being here that, you know, medication will be very helpful to others. And it's just keeping busy. And Siegel here has many activities for us so that we don't have much downtime, you know. And when we do have a little bit of downtime, I like to do some meditation and reflecting upon what it is that I'm doing while I'm here and what I'm going to do once I leave the study, you know. And it's just, I do believe that these studies will help people in the future, and I think they're necessary.
Thank you, Ken. Eric, over to you. Any words or thoughts for people who are actually in trials and how to anticipate and even think about managing a potential challenge that they might face?
In terms of individuals who are actively in trials, as a sort of non-clinician, I don't know that I have that much to offer, but on the sort of behind the scenes end of things, I would say that research has a lot to learn from our patients. So when we actually have the opportunity to speak with our patients who are in trials, and they inform us of, for example, various side effects or what we call comorbidities associated with their particular experimental therapeutic that we might not have anticipated on the research side. This kind of information is very, very important for us to know so that we can better design what we're studying, right? So that we can come up with better, more targeted therapeutics, which might have less side effects than the ones that patients experience. So I would say that if patients have the opportunity to really communicate what they're going through to the research side or to their clinical coordinators to communicate communicate that to the research side, that that's a really important thing to help us help produce better therapeutics.
Great. And Dara, over to you to close out our discussion here on this question.
Yeah, I think the challenges, are many, but I think most importantly, I think we use a term, about meeting, people where they are. What's a challenge for me may not be a challenge for someone else, but I think, one of the things that we can all agree on is that access continues to be a big challenge to participation. There are upfront expenses that are sometimes a barrier. And I think we know that complex clinical trials often take place at established research and medical facilities, which really aren't always accessible to all populations, and underserved communities may have to travel across the city or even sometimes a state to access a clinical trial site. So that can result in financial and time burden on the trial participants. So I think we need to do a better job of making clinical trials more accessible in that way. And then the clinical trial design itself, in particular, the frequency of site visits. Certainly, given where we are today, we're going to have to be much more savvy about figuring out ways to both recruit and retain participants in a way that doesn't require them to actually, go to a physical site, which, that travel is a major barrier. It's one thing to hop on a bus across town to a major hospital every 6 months or so, but if you have to go every, week or every 6 weeks, that can really influence the value proposition for some people. But I think by and large, some of the biggest challenges will differ immensely based on the study and the participant, and it's really incumbent upon us to figure out how to meet people where they are, and so that we can have the diversity of participation that I think is critically important in research.
Great. Well, let's open it up for questions from our audience. And I have a few here that have come in. One that's very, very common that we're receiving now is sort of a general question. In each of your experiences, how has the pandemic sort of changed the participation experience? How has it helped the clinical trial experience evolve, if you will? And some of the comments you've just made, Dara, about change in physical visits versus now being able to meet the patient more easily through remote and virtual means. But if I could ask each of you to just comment on ways that you think in general trials are adapting during the pandemic. Matthew, if I could come over to you first. It looks like you were just about to say something.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I participated in a trial for related to helping people with serious mental health challenges, and help them with their activities of daily living. And it was done remotely, and I felt like it was a benefit to do it remotely. I felt safe because I wasn't in a building with a bunch of other people, but it created a little bit of an easier access. You log in and meet with the person conducting the study, and so I felt like it was nice participating in that, and being able to have it accessible from my home. So,
Eric, can I put you on the spot? Obviously, the nature of your research is different. Are you able to adapt the collection of tissue samples and some of the material that you use in your research using more remote approaches?
So our research, I will say, by and large, has been slowed down a little bit transiently. Obviously, within the lab, we've reduced our staff per space area, and everyone is wearing proper personal protective equipment and social distancing. In terms of actual access to tissue specimens and whatnot, that surprisingly has not slowed down. What I can say is that looking across the driveway, so at Moffitt, we have research right across the driveway from the hospital. Our center has gotten much more aggressive about, for example, pre-surgery testing for COVID to make sure that the patients and our surgeons and other clinical staff are safe. All sorts of expected safety procedures have been ramped up. On the research side, there's been transient slowdown, but overall, we've managed. We've been able to figure out ways to coordinate odd hours work. So I'll have PhD students coming in the middle of the night or early in the morning and switching shifts. So much like in other fields, but ultimately we want to keep our patients as safe as possible.
We found that in some of the work that we've done, that telemedicine is becoming much more prevalent. So you have a chance to interact with study staff, but you do it through like a video conference, or you have a chance to interact with them by primarily through like a telephone connection. And that has worked very well for many studies. Well, here's a question that is simple on the surface, but may have more underneath it. So let me pose it to each of you. And the question is, are study volunteers paid for their participation?
Yes, I'm being paid for my SQL trial here.
And can you tell us more? The payment that you receive, is it for the commitment of time? Is it how has it been presented to you?
It's broken down on a daily basis. Each day that I'm here, I am paid a certain amount, and I'll be here 21 days, and then have a weekly scheduled payment of all of the funds. So what I'm saying is every day that I'm here, I get paid. If I were so to leave, that would end that day. The payments would end that day.
And Matthew, can I ask you to just comment on that as well? In your experience, are study volunteers typically paid for their participation?
Yeah, in my experience, on I think every occasion I was compensated for my participation in the study. Actually, if I remember correctly, after getting out of the hospital, I think I saw a flyer about a study, and I wasn't working at the time, so I felt like it was a nice benefit to be able to receive compensation. So I participated. Yeah.
What we typically see at SysGRIP is certainly not all studies provide compensation, but those that do, it's usually really to help compensate you for the time that you're putting into the study. Some will primarily provide some support for travel or transportation and daycare, that sort of thing, really to sort of ease the burden of participation in the trial and to be a motivator as well. But compensation always has to go through the review by the institutional review board or an ethical review committee to make sure that it's representative and fair compensation for the time and the contribution that you're making to the study. So here's another question that has come into us. Do patients get involved in the design of a study protocol? And Dara, maybe I can draw you into this one because I know Pfizer has been involved in soliciting input into your protocol designs.
Yeah, so it depends on the study for sure. And certainly at Pfizer and pretty much across the nation, we're finding that the more you involve patients in the beginning of the process, the more likely it is that they will be engaged and more importantly, retained in the study. So it is not that on every study patients are involved and engaged, but certainly as appropriate, patients are brought in. I can talk about my experience with the All of Us research program prior to joining Pfizer, and it was at the National Institutes of Health. And we, one of our core values was patients as partners. And we really brought patients in and had them part of our governance, part of our executive leadership team. They sat and were equal partners with our scientists. And so they were involved in the design of the protocol. And, that is, when you hear the phrase, nothing about us without us, certainly when you involve and engage people in an authentic way in the beginning, and you take into account the things that matter to them, it is a great outcome. And so The short answer to your question is absolutely. In some cases, patients are involved in helping to design study endpoints, some aspects of a protocol. And I think we're going to see more and more of that over, as we move forward, because it's a win-win. It really is a win-win.
Thank you. Any other comments to add to what Dara has just shared?
So on the basic research side, actually, patients more and more now do have the opportunity to weigh in on maybe not necessarily all the technical or granular aspects of our experiments, but in terms of what we prioritize. So the majority of all of our research is grant funded. So as laboratories, we compete and apply for grant funding. And nowadays, you're hard pressed to find a grant funding opportunity where you apply without a patient outreach plan or public outreach plan. And oftentimes on the grant review boards, there's often a patient or a lay advocate or representative to weigh in on how compelling X, Y, or Z grants are for patient benefit. So I think. And maybe this is speaking more to the patients now, that they should rest assured that the research end of things is starting to get their stuff together to really reach out to really make more productive efforts to reach out and solicit public opinion and public input on what we do.
That's right.
That's great, Eric. Thank you. Here is an interesting question that someone has posed. Can someone with a pre-existing medical condition participate in a clinical trial?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. It depends on the trial, of course. Each trial has its own requirements, but certainly having a pre-existing condition does not preclude someone from participating in research. Perhaps in some studies, and it should be called out very clearly what pre-existing conditions can or cannot be present, but just having a pre-existing condition in and of itself does not preclude you from participating in a clinical trial.
And Matthew, can I ask you to comment on that as well? I mean, Dara, you're really referring to the fact that every trial has its own eligibility requirements, and for some of them, a pre-existing condition may actually be one of the eligibility or the inclusion criteria. So for someone who's thinking about a trial, don't give up if you think that a pre-existing condition prevents you from participating. You should inquire further into the eligibility for the study. And Matthew, I don't know if you've encountered some of the eligibility criteria in your studies and can share a little bit of your experience with them.
Yes, so the studies I was involved in really had to do with mental health and previous psychiatric hospitalization. So I don't remember any pre-existing conditions beside, that would preclude me, but I remember that one of the conditions was you had to have a certain diagnosis, or whether it's mental health diagnosis. So that's what I recall from previous studies.
Great, thank you. And here's another one, sort of a general question. If you volunteer for a study, will you learn about the results of the study when they're available? Is that a fair expectation?
It's more than a fair expectation. The reality is, unfortunately, until recently, there were many studies that were done where people did not ever hear about the results, or they learned about it in the newspaper. So I think more and more researchers understand that it's incumbent upon them to make sure that the participants, who really volunteered and generously gave of themselves to participate in a study, should be given back information, and not just given back information, but giving it back to them in a way that they can understand it. So the short answer is there is a reasonable expectation that you should get the results of the study. If you don't, you should ask for it, right? Because right now, everyone isn't giving it back, but I think that is another positive that we're going to see down the road where, that is automatic, that you will be given that information. So if you're not getting it, definitely ask for it.
And Matthew, again, can I ask you, and Kenneth, maybe you can comment as well. Having been in a trial, Matthew, did you receive the results of your study? And Kenneth, maybe you can then comment, is it an expectation that you have in your trial now?
Having been in a trial, have I received the results? I've received follow-up, but I think some of the trials I was involved in are still ongoing, and some of them, they're still ongoing. So I haven't necessarily received the results, but there is follow-up, where the research coordinators, check in and offer some information or thank me or.
And Kenneth, any thoughts from you just on your expectation about the results of your study?
Yes, for myself, it would just be the follow-up of the study after I am discharged.
Great. Well, I have one other question that's come through, and it's actually a number of people have posed this, so I'll try to combine questions. It really relates, Dara, to something that you mentioned right at the outset, which is what are clinical research professionals doing to improve and ensure a higher level of diversity and inclusion in our studies today? Are there things that are being done to make trials more accessible to communities that often have not had the opportunity to participate in the past?
Yes, absolutely, and thankfully so. I'd love to share some of our work and learnings from our process to develop a COVID-19 vaccine candidate, because we really made intentional efforts to design our study in a way that was inclusive and met the needs of potential study volunteers from diverse backgrounds. Because, if we didn't, the populations that were already underserved risk not benefiting from this potential medical breakthrough, potentially leading to even more pronounced health disparities. So some of the ways that we work to mitigate this risk, first of all, we made sure that our study teams conducted the research in locations with diverse communities and selected investigator sites in diverse communities that were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And this was to ensure that individuals who had been most impacted have the opportunity to participate. I talked a little bit about meeting people where they are. We worked with sites also on an individual basis to better understand and enhance their efforts to develop impactful strategies to address the local needs, to meet people where they are, and also mitigate any of the barriers that we talked about earlier that were unique perhaps to underrepresented communities in their areas. These include, as we talked about, language barriers, which was a big deal. We had patient-focused materials that needed to be translated so that people could understand it. And then, another key element was community engagement. We work with sites that already had established community networks and engagement strategies for diverse populations. You can't just build a relationship in one day. It takes time. You can't build trust overnight. It takes time. We partnered with grassroots community organizations and really worked closely with our advocacy partners who served as ambassadors or trusted voices and resources to share our commitment to equity in clinical trial recruitment. And, all of this was to raise awareness, and to increase diverse participation in our clinical trials. We even brought in a multicultural media group to help us create public service announcements to spread awareness. And we did videos, and because it's so important, and I will tell you, it paid off. I mean, it really paid off. The diversity in our COVID-19 vaccine trial, while far from perfect, it is really exemplary, and it's really exciting and encouraging.
That's great. Thank you. Eric, can I ask if at your institution, are there things that you're doing to try to improve diversity and inclusion as well?
Yes. So Moffitt services 15 different counties within what we call the catchment area of Florida. And as with any cancer center, any major medical center, in order to maintain standing and whatnot with the National Institutes of Health, we have to demonstrate that we're servicing all of our catchment areas, all of the counties within our catchment areas, and to basically have open discussion within, from top down of the administration to the earliest stage researcher. What are strategies that we can implement to best service the diverse populations within those catchment areas? So we've had numerous faculty retreats and department retreats to try to encourage the researchers to better design their studies to factor for these things, whether we're trying to target racial healthcare disparities or disparities within the LGBTQ plus communities or other similar types of disparities. This is an active area that is really promoted for study design. And so that's basically what our center does. I believe many of them other major centers are doing similar things. So there is a common movement towards enhanced community outreach and engagement for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to echo the same thing, that it's become an area of such great interest throughout the clinical research community. Dara, some of the comments that you made about really partnering with the community and really making sure that the voices are heard and you take the time to build that trust. It's not something that happens overnight, is so important. Very exciting to hear that the experience has been so exemplary. And we'll look forward to learning more in the future about what a number of organizations have done to start to really improve a representation in our studies. Well, I just want to thank all of our panel members. Thank you so much. Time certainly flies when you have an interesting conversation. Thanks for sharing your views and your experience. And I certainly really appreciate you taking the time to participate in the panel today. Thank you so much.
Thank you again to all of our speakers today for volunteering their time. This has been really informative, and we appreciate all that you do to improve public health. And thank you to all who submitted questions through our chat box. So please be sure to check out our FAQ section linked below in the media player for more information. Please take a moment to answer poll question number 5. True or false? Only people who are sick can volunteer for a clinical trial. There will only be 2 more poll questions throughout the program, so make sure you're testing your knowledge and you'll be eligible to win some raffle prizes. Now I'd like to introduce Tracy Jason, President and CEO of the Florida Breast Cancer Foundation, to provide information and tips about breast health.
Hi, I'm Tracy Jason, the President and the CEO of the Florida Breast Cancer Foundation, and I am so excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much for having me. I want to begin by saying I hope that you and your families are safe and well. I always get excited when I have the chance to give people the information they need to be healthy and to keep their families safe and healthy. So with that in mind, I'm going to begin with some questions, and yes, we are virtual, so I'm not going to be able to hear your answers, but I'm pretty certain that I can guess how many of you know this and how many of you know that. Email me, let me know. Someone out there watching, I'm sure, will let me know how far off I am. Okay, so the first question, did you know 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime? That's 1 in 8. I'm going to guess about half of you know that. There's a lot of awareness out there these days, and that's fantastic because that means more of you are aware and doing what you need to do. But I say 50% because I'm pretty certain there's about half of you that were not aware of that. So look around. If you see 7 women around you, 1 in 8 of you will be diagnosed in her lifetime. Although I'm hoping to change that by doing events like this and by educating and empowering. Okay, and there's stuff that you can do, and we're gonna get to that. So if you do what you need to do, we can get that lower. Let's get that lower, okay? Number 2, did you know that men could get breast cancer too? Well, it's true, and I'm guessing about half of you know that too. Now, I'm going to say half, and that seems high, but I'm going to say that because more and more, there's a lot of awareness about that too. You can watch certain dramas at night on TV, and they address this issue. So men get breast cancer too. And now I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to guess very few of you know. I'm going to say about 15%, 1-5, not 50, 1-5. Did you know that only 10% of breast cancers are genetic? Only 10% of breast cancers are genetically hereditary. Let's say it that way. That's really a better way to say it. Only 10% of breast cancers are hereditary. So although family history is a very important and big indicator, if you have breast cancer in your family, you really need to pay attention. You need to be particularly proactive and dogged. But only 10% are hereditary. So that means 90% of breast cancer cases are environmental. Now, precisely what that means, they're still trying to determine, and it might actually be different in one geographic location versus another. But there are some things that they do know for sure when we say environmental, and that is that you can actually adopt healthy lifestyle habits that will reduce your risk of getting breast cancer. So I'm going to talk to you more about all of those in just a moment. But at this point, I want to show you a video. It's a PSA of our organization, the Florida Breast Cancer Foundation. You'll get to meet some of the staff, some of our board members, and some of our volunteers, some amazing survivors. And I think by getting to know them a little bit, you're going to get to know our organization a little bit, our stellar organization.
For the friends that I've lost.
More time to celebrate life.
To make a difference.
Por las mujeres del mundo y de mi familia.
For my grandson, because I'm a fighter.
My mom, my daughter, me, all of us.
Memory of my wife.
The dream and the cure.
To share the hope. What is your reason why?
Remember I told you I was going to give you some lifestyle habits that you can adopt that will actually reduce your risk of getting breast cancer? Well, you just learned about one, and it is exercise. You got it. That's right, exercise. When you exercise, it actually lowers your estrogen levels, and that may indeed reduce your chances of getting breast cancer as well as other diseases. Another thing that you can do right now to prevent your chances of getting breast cancer is adopt a healthy diet. Leafy green vegetables, fish, fruits, all of that. It's good for you, and plus it will reduce your risk. Make sure you get enough rest. Keep those stress levels down. That's a real important one. When you are stressed out, cortisol is constantly racing through your body. It's breaking down your systems, laying the perfect home for any sort of disease to set up shop, including, yes, breast cancer. And of course, get your screenings. This is very important. Now, the general guideline age is you get your first mammogram at the age of 40. But if you have a family history, talk to your doctor. You'll get it earlier. If you have any reason whatsoever to think that you might be in jeopardy, go ahead. Talk to your doctor. Which brings me to my last point that I really want to stress here, and that is advocate for yourself, advocate for your families. There is no one that cares more about your health or your family's health than you. Did you hear me say that? It's so important. There is no one who will care about you and your family's health as much as you do. So you have to fight. You have to fight for the right treatments. You have to fight for the right diagnostic tests. I want to tell you a quick story. Before I moved into the role of president and CEO of Florida Breast Cancer Foundation, I was actually a news reporter and news anchor all around the country. And my last stint was right here in town. Maybe some of you watched, and if you didn't, I don't want to know. But Fox 35 in Orlando. And while I was there, I did a lot of health stories. And I shared this story usually when I'm speaking to people because it really drives home the need for advocacy. I did a story about a mom who had a little boy. He was about 6.5 years old at the time. And she tells me one day she was washing dishes like she did every single night, standing at her kitchen sink. When the little boy came up to her, tugged at her shirt, she looked down. He said, "Mom, I'm not feeling well. I got a big headache." And she just had a bad feeling. Later on that night, he started to vomit. Went to the doctor the next day. Doctor said, "Look, he has a headache and he's doing all this because he has the flu. Like a lot of kids have the flu right now." She said, "No, I have a feeling. I want an MRI." The doc said, "No, we're not doing an MRI. Your child has the flu." And mom said, "I want an MRI." They got an MRI, and it turns out that he had brain cancer, a pretty good-sized tumor growing. 6 months later, he passed away. But she had 6 more months that she may not have had she not gotten that diagnosis. And On a more up note, she did have resources and means and the wherewithal and the resilience to take this moment and make it into her own cause. And she traveled the world and actually found researchers to investigate this specific type of brain cancer. And she is actually behind the FDA trials to investigate something called NK cells, natural killer cells. Anyway, I tell that story because that's a perfect example. Listen to your instincts. Get to know your body. Get to know your breast. Overall breast self-awareness is what we talk about. I always get the question, should I examine my breast once a month in the shower? My answer is yes and no. Yes, of course, do it in the shower, but don't just do it in the shower and don't just do it once a month. When you're in the shower with soap, sometimes you don't feel a lump. So you have to, the best position, lay down, lift your arm up and feel. Talk to your doctor about this. Just pay attention to yourself. And by the way, it's not always a lump. Sometimes it's a rash, scaly skin. Sometimes it's just a feeling of pain, and sometimes it's nothing. Maybe you're feeling tired. Pay attention to your body. Talk to your doctor.
Thank you so much, Tracy. To find more information, please visit their virtual booth in the Vicasa room. I would like to thank each of you for joining us at our 5th virtual Aware for All event. Our aim was to help each of you become more informed about the clinical research process, learn where to go for more information, hear what it's like to be a volunteer in a clinical research study, and connect with many professionals right in your own backyard who can assist you in learning more about clinical research participation. We hope this is just the start of the conversation. There are a number of resources for you to refer to continue your learning, starting with your handbook, as well as our resource center on our website. So be sure to check out our virtual exhibit hall where you can explore booths from local organizations and supporters. You can access the virtual health fair by clicking on the image below the media player or by clicking on the link in the resource list. All of our event materials can be found at awareforall.org, and they can serve as a guide with information about clinical research and clinical trials here in Miami. All of our event materials can be found at awareforall.org. They can serve as a guide with information about clinical trials here in Miami, as well as information about clinical research participation. This 6th raffle question is now up on your screen. How likely are you to tell your friends or family about something you learned today? We truly hope that you'll share your key takeaways. We will also plan to follow up after today's event with the survey, and we'd really appreciate if you could share your feedback with us as we continue to enhance the virtual version of our Aware for All program. I'd like to take this moment to recognize the medical heroes here in the audience tonight. Thank you for helping to find better ways to diagnose, prevent, and treat disease that improves public health and advance medical science. We hope you feel recognized as a valuable partner in this process. Without you, we would not be able to conduct new research and discover new cures and treatments. We are grateful for your gift of participation. And now the final poll question. What brings you to the Aware webinar today? You can select any answers that apply. Thank you to everyone who has answered the poll questions. You are now eligible to win one of our many wonderful prizes donated to us by our local supporters. We will be contacting our winners directly, so please be sure to check your email at the close of this program. Thank you all again for joining us this evening for our clinical research education program, and we hope to connect with you at future Aware for All events. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about the virtual exhibit hall and the webinar in our follow-up survey. And we'll keep the event page open for a few more minutes before closing the webinar in case you want to visit the virtual health fair or download the event handbook. We look forward to keeping in touch and have a great evening, everyone.